Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 295 for the 17th of Elul in a leap year. So we've been talking about the idea of human emotions. We spoke about personality type systems. We mentioned the Enneagram, the Myers-Briggs, things like this. And the thing that all of these systems tend to have in common is that they really try to break down the human personality or human emotions into its core components. And we spoke about how Tanya actually has this as well. There's a Jewish Kabbalistic tradition of understanding the basis of our emotions, which ultimately have spiritual root to them, because ultimately we were created in the image of God, right? So we spoke about the idea that the more we can understand ourselves on a human level, this can actually serve as a gateway to kind of give us this portal into understanding God, because we can see this kind of like miniature, like expression of these different emotions and learn to understand how they are actually attributes that represent something much greater. We gave the caveat in the episode that we did about dust and ashes that we shouldn't make the mistake that these emotions that we experience and that we feel are in any way really, really like similar to how they manifest within God, because we're not God ultimately, and there's no real comparison in that way. But it is kind of something to give us a little bit of a glimpse of it. It's sort of like a little snapshot, maybe like one way to think about it is like looking at a picture of, let's say, like the Empire State Building versus being at the Empire State Building. So obviously there's no comparison really between the two, between visiting the Empire State Building and just looking at a picture of it. But there's something you can learn from the picture, nevertheless, right? That's kind of a way to understand it. So yesterday we spoke about this. We gave this topography of emotions. We gave the map of the emotions. We spoke about how there are 7 basic emotions, or a better way to phrase it is 7 basic emotive attributes. And we outlined 6 of them. We left out the 7th for reasons that weren't really explained by the Alter Rebbe. For some reason, he left out the 7th. And today, we're actually going to get deeper into this, and we're going to explore how really ultimately, at the basis of these 7 emotions, there are actually only 2, because these 7 emotions are actually, well, they're the emotional attributes. They're the external representation of the emotions. They're external expressions of emotions. They're emotive is the way that we can kind of describe it. So Lahavdil, maybe we can think about this in terms of Myers-Briggs in the different functions. There's something called the extroverted feeling, and then there's the introverted feeling. The extroverted feeling, people who have extroverted feeling are very emotive kind of people. They show their emotions. The introverted feeling people are not necessarily the type of people that show a lot of emotion. They don't go around hugging people and things like that, but they feel it on the inside. So this maybe can help us understand that the 7 emotions, these are the emotive emotions. These are the emotions that get expressed. This is what you see. This is the way they manifest in the outside world. But really, ultimately, what we're going to learn about today is that the core, the internal aspects of these emotions can really be divided into 2 categories, with all the other emotions stemming out of these 2. What are the 2 categories? What are the 2 internal core base emotions? These are the emotions of love and fear. So different psychologists have actually brought up this idea as well of like attraction and revulsion. Like these are sort of like the 2 internal driving forces behind all of human activity, behind all of human motivation. So that's the idea that it is here too. That basically, if we go back to those emotions that we learned about yesterday, there's the emotion of chesed, of giving. There's the emotion of restraint, of withholding. Those are most obviously related to love and fear, right? Because if you love something, then you want to give to it. And if you fear something, then you're scared to get too close to it. That's sort of the idea. And what we'll learn about today is that the rest of the emotions are all offshoots of those two. So really, they're all just coming from that core place. At the baseline, they're coming from the place of love and fear. We'll also learn about today the connection between the mind and the emotions. So right now, we've really just been focusing on the emotional aspect of a person. But as we've learned about in the past, we have an intellect also. We have a mind, and there are intellectual attributes as well as emotive attributes. If you recall, we talked about the 3 intellectual attributes, Chochmah, Bina, and Das. And what we're going to learn about today is that there's actually a relationship between a person's intellect and a person's emotion. And they're not just like these two separate things. And there's a correspondence between the two, so that the deeper a person's intellect is, the deeper they can feel, the deeper their emotions will be. This can make sense on kind of a commonsensical level, that the more refined a person is intellectually, the more refined their emotions will be. This doesn't mean, and I want to make this clear, this doesn't mean that just because someone's really, really smart or really intellectual, they're going to have really strong emotions. That's often not the case, right? It's very much not the case. And it also doesn't mean that somebody who isn't very intelligent at all isn't going to be a very emotional person and isn't going to have very strong emotions. So it's not about IQ. That's not really what we mean when we talk about intellect versus emotion. It's a different kind of thing. So we're going to get into all of this. So let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe breaks it down, and we'll kind of explain more as we go. So for context, we are still in the middle of Epistle 15 of Iggeres HaKodesh. And so the Alter Rebbe begins, and he says that these emotive attributes that we were talking about yesterday, and go back to yesterday's episode if you need that review to go over it, these are the aspects of the externality of the soul. And within them is vested the internal attributes, what are the internal attributes? These are the aspects of love and fear, etc. He doesn't say what the etc. is. And as we'll learn, that's really because the love and fear is kind of like the main internal attributes. So meaning to say, how can we understand this? So Alter Rebbe gives us an example of how this manifests. So a very common example that's brought up in Tanya, you may have noticed a lot, is the imagery of a father and a son. So in the case of a father and a son, says the Alter Rebbe, the father, let's say you have a father who wants to bestow to his son. He wants to give to his son. Why does he do this? He does this out of love. Right? That's the motivating factor usually in terms of when a father wants to give to his son. And why would a loving father want to hold back from giving to his son in some way? This is out of fear. This is because he's scared. He doesn't want to bring him into some kind of downfall, God forbid. So he may refrain from exposing the son to certain things, for example, right? So it's like there's certain things that the father is going to show the son and teach to the son, and some things he's going to hold back from teaching to the son because he wants to protect him. So it's coming from a fear place. So that's really, the Alter Rebbe says, is the core of the internal aspects of all of the external emotions that we discussed is really this internal place, this place of love and fear. Now the Alter Rebbe goes on and he says, now the root of all of these emotions, whether we're talking about the internal emotions or the external emotions, is actually coming from the minds, from the intellect, from the Chochmah, Bina, and Das that's in the person's soul. And so we spoke about these previously, but I'll give a brief breakdown now of what they are. And again, these words, the translations just do not do these words justice at all. And these concepts, each one of these concepts, Chochmah, Bina, and Das, it's like Sfarim have been written about them, lectures have been given. It's like there's so much more to learn with every single one of these things. But on a really small, like simplistic level, just to give you kind of an idea of what each one of these things, what each one of these intellectual attributes mean. So we have Chochmah. Chochmah can be thought of as like intuition. It's like the intuitive spark. Like when you know something intuitively, it's an intellectual knowledge. It's something you know, but you can't quite break it down. Like, let's say if you just you see somebody and you get this feeling, you can't trust them, or you get this. So it's a feeling, but it's an intellectual feeling. Or it's like you're working on a project and you're trying to figure out some problem that you're working on. And then you get it. It's that aha moment where you figured it out, but you can't quite explain it to anybody else. You can't quite break it down yet. Then you have Bina. Bina is the elaboration. Bina is the analysis. This is all the details of the concept, all of the details of what it is that you're thinking about. That's the Bina. And then you have the Das. That's the third one. The Das is it's translated as knowledge. And really the best way to understand it is integration. It's the bridge between the mind and the emotions. It's where it becomes personal, where the knowledge isn't just some theoretical thing anymore, but it's actually something that is real and true to you in a true way. Okay, so now what's the connection between the mind and the emotions? So the Alter Rebbe says that there's a connection. There is a connection. There's actually a relationship, a correlation between the person, the intellect of a person, and that is what's going to make their emotions as they are. As we see, so he says we see this in actuality, for example, with a child. So a child, their chokhmah, bina, and das, their intellect, they're small. They're, in Hebrew we call it katnos. It's like petty. Like children, they don't know that much, right? So they're sort of petty. Their knowledge is very small. And so thus, what do they care about? How do their emotions get displayed? In small things. Like they don't really care for lofty goals. It's like the famous example that people give. It's like you show a little baby a piece of chocolate cake and then $100 bill, and you give them the choice where to go to. They're going to go to the chocolate cake without realizing that the $100 bill could actually buy lots of cake, right? So it's like they don't understand the value of things so much. And that is because their intellect is not fully developed. And so too, not only with children, but we know even with adults as well. There's a phrase, and there's a citation here from Mishlei chapter 12, verse 8. Lefi sichlo yehulal ish. That according to the intellect, to a person's intellect, is a person praised. So meaning to say that it's like, you can get a sense of a person's intellect based on what they care about. That's the easiest way to explain it. It's like, do people care? Does a person care about petty things, or do they care about more refined, lofty kind of things? Where do they place their value in their life? And that is going to parallel their intellect. And so the Alter Rebbe elaborates on this, and he says that because according to the extent of a person's chokhmah, like the wiser a person is, that is going to manifest in how great their love and how great their giving is going to be. So meaning to say, on a very simple level, it's like a very wise person is going to most likely love more, because it's like think about it, like what makes a person not so loving sometimes is because they're not very wise. It's because they don't really have an understanding of other people. They're like sort of shallow minded. Somebody who's a little bit more open minded, somebody who's a little bit wiser and is able to see beyond just the surface, that is going to make a person into a more loving person and to a more giving person. Which, as a side note, that's why, one remedy really for trying to be a nicer, kinder person is really to develop this trait of just trying to become wiser. So we see this in actuality with very wise scholars. Like, how many very wise scholars do you know who are not very loving people? Like, it's not very common. It tends to go together, and this is the reason for this. And so so that he gives this example of love being related to chokhmah, but the Alter Rebbe says that this is actually true for all of the emotive attributes, whether we're talking about the internal attributes or the external attributes. Their sources all come from the intellect. There's a connection to the intellect. Their root, their source is from the intellect. And the main part of the intellect that we're concerned with, says the Alter Rebbe, is the das, the third one. The one that, again, we translated as knowledge, but really better to be understood as the idea of integration, of attachment, of having the knowledge be personal. Because this das, so this comes from the chokhmah and bina. So it's like you have the chokhmah, and then you have the bina, and then the baby, the child that results from it, is the das. And this das is the bridge between the mind and the emotions. And that's why developing a person's das is so important. And the Alter Rebbe concludes that we see this in actuality. So interestingly, the word das, another translation of the word das is opinion. If you have an opinion, that's your das. In modern day Hebrew people say that, like, ma da'atcha, like, what do you think about this? What's your opinion on this? So different people have different opinions, and these different opinions that they have is going to influence what they feel, what they're emotional about, right? So this is a very simple way to understand this idea of the connection between a person's intellect and their emotions is that a person's values, what they care about, what they're passionate about, is connected to the opinions that they have on different matters. We see this in political conversations all the time, right? Like, who are the people that tend to care the most about recycling? Who are the people that tend to care the most about guns? Who are the people that tend to care the most about eliminating taxes or reducing taxes? Like, I don't want to get into a political discussion, and I'm not giving opinions on any of these things, but we see that whatever your opinion is, you can think about this for a moment for yourself. If you have a political opinion that's very strong, it makes you feel emotional whenever you talk about it. You're going to get passionate about it. It's not just some intellectual, theoretical thing. So that's why Das is such an essential thing, because without the Das, the intellect is very cold. The intellect still has the potential to birth emotions, but it can only do so with the help of Das, because otherwise, sure, you can talk about like political theory from today till tomorrow, but if it's not personal to you, like if you talk about like, if people talk about like political situations in different countries, chances are, if they don't know anybody there, and if they're not like hugely involved in politics, they're not going to get as passionate about political discussions that take place in their home country right here, because that's something that's a lot more personal to them. And so thus the connection to the emotions is much more evident and much more straight, without hindrance, because it's coming from that Das. So that's it for today. So hopefully that was enlightening to you and gave you a little bit more of an insight into where our emotions come from. And we'll continue with this tomorrow. And tomorrow we're actually going to conclude this epistle. So stay tuned, and I'll speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.